But yeah, sometimes you do have to you have to disconnect a little bit from like, okay, I did this thing and I did it and I like it and I think it's good and it solves my needs or whatever,
Mhm.
but people didn't like it. And it shouldn't be personal, but it's really hard to not make it personal
Yeah.
when you have so much like self-worth or self just interest in it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it can be hard, and it can be hard. And I think again, on the if you're providing criticism or critique, I think that's something to remember too. Is like even if you're just critiquing or criticizing the thing, like the product, like even if you keep it just focused on the product, like it will be taken personally to an extent, and that's you can't necessarily avoid that.
Mhm.
And um, yeah, I think that's important to remember from both sides.
From the side of being critical, this is something I've certainly experienced firsthand. People will provide something that they feel is constructive criticism, and that's great.
Hmm.
Please go ahead and do so. But the issue is when someone feels like they're giving constructive criticism and then you don't feel that that is useful criticism, or you don't think like maybe it's well argued, it's well like everything about it is well intentioned. But
Hmm.
say for example like GNOME, like if you give a completely well reasoned argument why like a system tray is a good idea and why upstream should have a system tray, it's absolutely great. There's not like any fault in the logic there. Just because the project doesn't think that that is a good idea doesn't mean the project is against constructive criticism. Like they
Yeah,
just
yeah,
might.
yeah,
Something I've started saying recently is even if you're giving constructive criticism, that doesn't mean it has to be accepted. You might be
yeah.
trying to construct something different.
That's a good point. Yeah, yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's something, especially thinking from the gnome perspective. Like, there's this, I don't know, there's this, I don't want to say meme, I don't know, mentality, I
Well,
guess, of
correct
like,
me if I'm wrong, but I think it's fair to say that GNOME has like they have a design vision, and that's the
yeah,
vision they are aiming towards. Like their goal isn't to be like you configure every little aspect of the
right,
desktop.
yeah,
There's obviously a lot of configuration you can do, but it's not like you're going to control everything. They've got this vision they want to aim towards, and that's where they are going. And
yeah,
they think that's a good idea, and that's great.
yeah,
I
yeah,
want
yeah.
to see someone do that because it seems like it's going well for them.
Where did I just saw, I think it was on Mastodon, there was an interesting discussion. Now I'm trying to think of who it was. Is it Nate from KDE? Is that,
Nate Graham,
I'll have
yeah,
to, I
is a
think,
blog.
but there was just a post on Mastodon that was really interesting
Mhm.
talking about like kind of the difference between KDE and GNOME,
Mhm.
and it was from somebody who works on KDE and contributes to KDE, and it was like I thought it was a really good perspective of KDE does it this way, and we often will not say no. We'll often be like, yeah, sure, your weird use case, yeah, great, we'll support that. Like, and that means that it can be really adaptable to whoever, to where you can build your own experience out of it, which is really cool. And I think there's value to that existing. And then on the GNOME side, GNOME designers and GNOME contributors say no a lot more, and
Curated.
people
That's what I
hear
was thinking
that.
of before. Curated is
Yeah,
what
it's like
GNOME is.
people hear that no and they're like, oh, they don't listen to feedback. And it's like, no, that's not what that is. They listen to feedback and they just don't agree that's what they want to build. And that's okay. Like that's that's how you build a cohesive, opinionated experience or project. And there's positives and negatives. Like, yeah, that post. I'll try to find it after the fact, and we maybe can link to it. But I thought it was a really really good kind of comparison of just the different approaches and what effect that has. And it doesn't mean one is better or worse. It just is they're just different. And I am on this of the opinion that if I'm going to build a product, I want it to be opinionated and have a specific vision. And so that I'm attracted to the gnome kind of philosophy because of that. And but some people aren't, and that's fine. And maybe
Don't.
that's a case of like maybe as a project that's something that approach to things is something you need to make more well communicated too, and just say, hey, we accept bug reports, we accept feedback, but we do have a specific vision in mind. And it's also not as like top down as some people think. There isn't just like three designers who make all the decisions or whatever. Like,
There are three designers that are very vocal on social media, and that's why people have that perception.
Yeah, sure. But it's like I was saying before with all the different stakeholders, like there's, these things can be years long processes where we're talking to different projects and different, even within GNOME itself, there's maintainers of specific components and there's like the GTK developers and like, it's not just like whatever the design team wants happens.
Right.
In some ways, as a contributor to the design team, I wish that was the case, but it's not how it actually works. But I do think, yeah, if you can communicate that as a project up front, like what your approach to design is, what your approach to suggestions and feedback is, it doesn't mean you're not listening to those suggestions and feedback. That all of that feedback does play into the design decisions that are made, but it doesn't mean that if you say, I think this should be a feature, that they're gonna be like, yeah, sure, yeah, no problem. Like that might be like, but how's that gonna work with this other feature we're working on? Like, yeah, there's just a
Yeah.
whole philosophy behind how a product is designed. So
I'm
yeah,
sure you've heard things like, I hate this statement. I wish it would go away. Like, Linux is about choice. Like, no, Linux is about freedom. Like, stop it. I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know at what point in the history of, like, the free software movement that it shifted from freedom being, you're able to modify the code. You have,
yeah,
like, you all the, four freedoms, all that, to you have the freedom to do whatever you want with the application. Like, it's flipped upside down, where it's like somebody,
yeah.
the work has to be done, but the work's not getting done. It's like, so if you want the freedom to modify things, someone needs to add that to the project. But if
Yeah,
no one's
and it's
adding
like,
it to the project, then obviously you don't have that ability to do it.
yeah, I think the freedom goes both ways, right? Like as a developer of an application, you have the freedom to develop it how you want.
Mhm.
Like, and if people don't like it and don't agree, they can fork it. I mean, that can be an abrasive way to say things like, you can fork it or patch is welcome or whatever. But that really is part of the beauty of open source is like, you can't, just because it's open source doesn't mean you have to do everything for everybody. Like, you can say as a project, this is what I want. Like I maintain a couple of just really dumb little apps on FlatHub, right? And like I get people that come to me and they're like, this is great, but I wish it did this other thing too. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just not, I don't have time. I'm not really interested. That wasn't the problem I was trying to solve. That doesn't mean like your idea is bad. That just means I don't want to do it. And that's like, the code is there. It's open. It's under a GPL license. Like you can take it and do it and adapt it, and that's awesome. And that's the power of open source and the freedom of open source is that you, as an end user, as somebody who gets the application and the thing, like you can get the source code that made it, and that's unique and powerful and something you don't get on proprietary mainstream platforms. Like, but that doesn't mean that you, as a user of open source, are entitled to every feature that you possibly want being implemented and maintained in perpetuity by somebody else. Like, so yeah, I think it can go both ways, and yeah, it's hard. And again, it's a communication thing too of like,
Yeah, that's what I was
if you're
about to get
saying,
into.
yeah, go ahead, yeah,
I was gonna say, I I don't want to call out specific names, but we both know that there are people in the GNOME project that do this. There are people there's definitely gonna be. I don't have names off the top of my head, but there are people in the KDE project that do this as well, who are like very. How would I say it? Are not bet. How do I say this without specifically mentioning people?
not delicate, not
Yeah, who are very.
yeah,
This goes back to what we're saying. They're like straight to the point, and like,
yeah,
I don't care that you think this is wrong. Like, I don't care that this is the way that you don't want.
yeah,
Go use something else. Like, we are not here to serve your specific like the way they
yeah,
approach
yeah.
it just is like, I don't know if it's intentionally inflammatory or it's just bad at communicating through text, or because I'm sure these people are great in person, but
Yeah, yeah,
there are certain people who are like they get harassed a lot for it because like people feel like their criticism isn't being heard, and this is what you were saying before, like this is like a two-way thing. Like you need to like if you want people to understand what you're doing, you need to explain the why and not just the what. And people from outside the project need to be able to like understand what's going on there. And I think ultimately the ultimate thing here is just don't use projects that don't align with what you want to do, and that will solve all your
yeah,
problems. But
right, yeah.
that's not always that easy.